The dust-laden wind whipped at Eleanor Harper's skirts as she crouched beside the broken wagon wheel, tears of frustration threatening to spill onto her cheeks. The snap had been sudden and decisive, a fatal crack that left her stranded on the lonely trail between Tucson and San Bernardino, with the merciless Arizona sun beating down upon her uncovered head like God's own judgment. Eleanor wiped her brow with the back of her hand, smearing dirt across her forehead. She'd been traveling for weeks, her life's possessions packed into this wagon, chasing a promise of a teaching position that awaited her in California. Now, 15 miles from the nearest town with a broken wheel and dwindling supplies, that dream seemed to be evaporating like morning dew under the scorching sun. "Easy, Pepper," she murmured to her agitated mare, who pawed at the ground nervously. The poor animal sensed their predicament as acutely as Eleanor did. "We'll figure this out." But how? Eleanor had basic survival skills her father had insisted on teaching her before she left Virginia, but repairing a wagon wheel was beyond her knowledge. The wooden spokes had splintered, and the iron rim had bent at an impossible angle. She had tools in her wagon, but without expertise, they might as well have been children's toys. Eleanor stood, shading her eyes to scan the horizon. The vastness of the landscape was both beautiful and terrifying. Miles of scrubland stretched in every direction, broken only by jutting rock formations and the occasional cluster of cacti. The trail itself was merely a suggestion of passage, marked by the faint impressions of those who had traveled before her. She was contemplating unhitching Pepper and riding to find help when a plume of dust appeared in the distance. Eleanor tensed, her hand instinctively moving to the small pistol hidden in her skirt pocket. The West was full of dangers, especially for a woman alone, and her father's final gift might prove more valuable than any other possession. As the rider approached, Eleanor could make out a tall figure atop a magnificent black stallion. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes, and a bandana covered the lower half of his face, protection from the dust rather than an attempt at concealment. His riding coat was weathered but well-maintained, marking him as someone who spent his life in the saddle. He slowed his horse as he neared, raising a hand in greeting. Eleanor didn't relax her grip on the pistol. "Afternoon, madam," the stranger called, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "Looks like you've had some trouble." Eleanor straightened her spine. "A broken wheel, as you can see." "Nothing I can't manage." The man chuckled, a warm sound that seemed at odds with his imposing figure. He dismounted with fluid grace, tying his horse to a nearby scrub before approaching. Only then did he pull down the bandana, revealing a square jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. "Yates Garland at your service," he said, tipping his hat. His eyes were a startling blue against his sun-bronzed skin. "And with all due respect, madam, that wheel needs more than management. It needs a miracle." Eleanor bristled at his presumption, even as she acknowledged the truth in his words. "Eleanor Harper," she replied stiffly. "I was headed to San Bernardino before this. Inconvenience." Yates crouched beside the wheel, running his fingers over the damage. "San Bernardino. That's a fair piece from here. What business takes you so far west, if you don't mind my asking?" "I do mind," Eleanor said sharply, then immediately regretted her tone. This man was the first person she'd seen in days, and antagonizing him wouldn't improve her situation. "I apologize. I've accepted a teaching position there." Yates nodded, seemingly unbothered by her initial rudeness. "Noble profession. These parts could use more schooling." He stood, dusting off his hands. "This wheel is beyond repair, Miss Harper. You'll need a replacement." Eleanor's heart sank. "And where might I find one in the middle of nowhere?" "You're in luck," Yates said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I'm not just a pretty face with a good horse. I worked as a wheelwright for 3 years before taking to ranching." Hope flickered in Eleanor's chest. "You can fix it." "Not this one, but I can make you a new one." He glanced at the sun's position. "It'll take time, though. We should make camp. There's a creek about a quarter-mile east of here. Better water for your horse and shade for you." Eleanor hesitated. Camping with a stranger wasn't proper, but neither was dying of thirst in the desert. "I have supplies," she said finally, "and I can pay you for your trouble." Yates waved away her offer. "No need for payment. Couldn't leave a lady stranded out here with a clear conscience. Let me help you unhitch your horse, and we'll get your wagon moved to that creek before sundown." Working together, they managed to lift the broken axle enough to slide a log beneath it, creating a makeshift skid. With Pepper and Yates's stallion harnessed together, they slowly dragged the wagon to the creek Yates had mentioned. The spot was a small oasis, a trickle of clear water cutting through the dusty landscape, flanked by cottonwoods that offered blessed shade. Eleanor felt her spirits lift at the sight of it. "Perfect camping spot," Yates declared, helping Eleanor set up. He moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to making and breaking camp regularly. "I'll need to find suitable wood for the wheel. Might have to ride a few miles to find a good oak or hickory." Eleanor busied herself with setting up her cooking equipment. "I have food to share," she offered. It seemed the least she could do. "Much obliged," Yates replied with a grin that transformed his rugged features into something almost boyish. "Trail rations get mighty tiresome." As dusk descended, they sat by a small fire, the desert chill settling around them. Eleanor had prepared a simple stew from her preserved supplies, which Yates ate with appreciative noises that made her unreasonably proud. "What brings you to these parts, Mr. Garland?" Eleanor asked, curious despite herself. Yates set his bowl aside. "Just Yates, please. I'm heading back to my ranch near San Bernardino. Been in Tucson selling cattle." "You have a ranch in California." Eleanor couldn't hide her surprise. "That's quite a coincidence." "The West is both vast and small," Yates replied cryptically. "My ranch is modest, just enough for a man to make his way. Started with 20 acres 5 years ago, built it up to 200 now." "Impressive," Eleanor said sincerely. "What about you? Most ladies traveling west are joining family or husbands." "You're journeying alone to take a teaching position," Eleanor stiffened slightly. "I'm not most ladies, Mr. Garland." "I noticed that right away," he said softly. Something in his tone made Eleanor look up, meeting his gaze across the fire. The intensity she found there caused her to glance away quickly. "My father passed last winter," she explained, focusing on the flames. "There wasn't much left in Virginia for me, and I've always wanted to see the West. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher needed in San Bernardino, it seemed like Providence." "I'm sorry about your father," Yates said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "Thank you." Eleanor swallowed the lump in her throat. "He would have approved of this adventure, I think. He always said I had too much spirit to be contained by Virginia society." Yates laughed. "Smart man. The West needs people with spirit." As the night deepened, they talked of inconsequential things: the weather, the trail conditions, the peculiarities of their respective horses. Eleanor found herself relaxing in Yates's company. His straightforward manner and easy conversation, a welcome change from the stilted interactions she'd endured on the stage coaches and in the crowded way stations. When it came time to retire, Eleanor retreated to her wagon while Yates made his bed beneath the stars, a respectful distance away. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the desert, Eleanor realized it was the first time since leaving Virginia that she felt truly safe. Morning brought renewed activity. After a breakfast of coffee and biscuits, Yates rode off to find suitable wood, promising to return by midday. True to his word, he appeared just as the sun reached its zenith, his horse dragging several substantial logs. "Oak," he announced proudly, dismounting. "Not ideal, but it'll get you to San Bernardino." Eleanor watched in fascination as Yates set to work. He had brought tools of his own better than Eleanor's, and he shaped the wood with skilled precision. His movements were methodical and sure, his concentration absolute as he fashioned spokes and a new hub. "Where did you learn this trade?" Eleanor asked, handing him a tool when he gestured for it. "My father was a carpenter in Missouri," Yates explained, measuring carefully. "I apprenticed with him until I was 16, then with a wheelwright in Independence. Useful skills for a man heading west." By late afternoon, the wheel was taking shape. Eleanor had never thought she would find the creation of a wagon wheel so captivating, but there was something mesmerizing about watching skilled hands bring order from chaos. "It will need to cure properly," Yates said, straightening his back with a wince. "Ideally for weeks, but we don't have that luxury. We'll have to bind it tight and hope for the best. Should hold until you reach civilization." "You're a miracle worker, Mr. Garland," Eleanor said sincerely, his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Told you that's what you needed." They spent another night at the creek, Yates finishing the wheel by firelight. The next morning they attached it to the wagon, a process that involved much lifting, adjusting, and occasional cursing, for which Yates apologized profusely. When the wagon stood ready at last, Eleanor felt a strange reluctance to continue her journey. "I can't thank you enough," she said, facing Yates. "You've saved more than my wagon. You've saved my future." Yates rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "About that," he said slowly. "The trail ahead has some rough patches. That wheel will hold, but it's not as sturdy as I'd like. I was thinking, if you don't object to the company, I could ride along with you to San Bernardino, just to make sure you arrive safely." Eleanor hesitated. The proper response would be to decline politely. She'd already spent 2 nights in this man's company. Her reputation would be in tatters if anyone knew. But the thought of continuing alone, with a potentially unstable wheel, was daunting. "I wouldn't want to delay your return to your ranch," she said, testing his sincerity. "No delay," Yates assured her. "I'm headed that way regardless, and 2 travelers are safer than 1 in these parts." Eleanor made a show of considering, though her mind was already made up. "Very well, Mr. Garland, I accept your escort, but I insist on compensating you for the wheel and your time." Yates shook his head firmly. "Not necessary. Consider it my welcome to California." They set off together under a clear blue sky, Eleanor driving her wagon while Yates rode alongside on his stallion. The new wheel creaked ominously at first, but settled as they traveled, performing admirably over the rough terrain. The journey that had seemed so daunting alone became almost pleasant with companionship. Yates knew the trail well, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the area's history. He had a gift for storytelling, painting vivid pictures of the characters who had shaped this wild country. "Just over that ridge is Apache territory," he informed her on the second day of their joint travel. "They've been peaceful lately, but it's best to be respectful." Eleanor eyed the distant hills nervously. "Have you had dealings with them?" "Some," Yates admitted. "Traded with them a few times." "They're fair if you're fair. Chief Neshe leads the band in these parts, wise man, but fierce when crossed." As if conjured by his words, they spotted a small group of riders watching them from a high bluff. Eleanor's hand moved toward her pistol, but Yates shook his head sharply. "No sudden movements," he cautioned. "They're just checking us out, probably seen us coming for miles." He raised a hand in greeting, and after a long moment, one of the Apache riders returned the gesture before the group disappeared over the ridge. "See. Nothing to worry about," Yates said, though Eleanor noticed he kept glancing toward the hills for the next several miles. That evening, as they made camp in a sheltered arroyo, Eleanor found herself studying Yates as he tended the fire. His confident handling of their Apache encounter had impressed her, revealing a man who navigated this harsh land with both strength and wisdom. "You've lived out here a long time," she observed. Yates nodded, stirring the coals. 10 years now. Came west after the war with nothing but my horse and my skills." He glanced up at her. "Never regretted it, even in the hardest times." "The war changed many things," Eleanor said softly, thinking of her own family's losses. "It did at that." Yates's expression turned distant. "Lost my brother at Antietam. My father never recovered from the grief." "I'm sorry," Eleanor murmured. "My mother passed during the war as well. Typhoid took her while she was nursing soldiers." Yates reached across the fire and briefly squeezed her hand. The gesture was comforting rather than forward, and Eleanor found herself grateful for the simple human connection. As the days passed, they fell into an easy routine. They would rise with the sun, break camp efficiently, and travel until the heat became unbearable. After a brief rest during the hottest part of the day, they would continue until dusk, making steady progress toward California. Eleanor discovered that Yates was not only skilled and resourceful, but also surprisingly well-read. He carried a battered copy of the Iliad in his saddlebags, and one evening he read aloud by firelight, his deep voice giving life to Homer's ancient verses. "Not what one expects from a cowboy," Eleanor remarked when he finished a particularly moving passage. Yates smiled faintly. "The West attracts all sorts, Miss Harper. I've met Harvard-educated prospectors and illiterate geniuses. Out here, a man is judged by what he can do, not where he came from." "And women," Eleanor challenged. "How are they judged?" "Even more harshly, I'm afraid," Yates admitted. "But that's changing, slowly. Women like you are helping change it." Eleanor wasn't sure if she should be flattered or defensive. "Women like me, brave ones, independent ones." His gaze was warm in the firelight. "Women who fix what's broken instead of waiting for someone else to do it." "I didn't fix my wheel," Eleanor pointed out. "You did." "You would have figured something out," Yates said with certainty. "I just happened along first." Their conversations continued to deepen as the miles stretched behind them. Eleanor found herself sharing thoughts she'd never voiced aloud: her fears about taking on a classroom of strangers, her dreams of someday writing a novel, her complicated feelings about leaving the only home she'd ever known. Yates, in turn, spoke of his struggles establishing his ranch, the loneliness of the frontier, and his hopes to someday build a proper home to replace the cabin he currently inhabited. "It's a good piece of land," he told her as they crossed into California territory. "Good water, good grass. The cabin's rough, but it's solid. Built it myself." "It sounds lovely," Eleanor said sincerely. Yates gave her a sidelong glance. "It's missing something important, though." "What's that?" "A woman's touch," he said simply, then urged his horse ahead before she could respond. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm, and not from the sun. She'd been aware of a growing attraction between them, but neither had acknowledged it directly until now. The impropriety of it should have troubled her more than it did, but conventional standards seemed increasingly irrelevant in this vast, untamed landscape. Their progress was steady, but not without challenges. The wheel held, though it required occasional adjustments. Once, they had to ford a swollen creek, the water rising alarmingly around the wagon bed. Another time, they detoured miles out of their way to avoid a prairie fire that painted the horizon orange. Through it all, Yates remained a steadfast companion, resourceful in crisis, thoughtful in conversation, and unfailingly respectful of Eleanor's independence. He offered assistance without assuming she needed it, and valued her opinions on everything from route choices to philosophical debates. One afternoon, as they crested a hill, Yates pointed to the distant horizon. "See that range? Once we're past those mountains, we're a day's ride from San Bernardino." Eleanor felt a conflicting surge of emotions, excitement at reaching her destination, tinged with regret that their journey was nearing its end. "Will you return to your ranch immediately?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Yates adjusted his hat. "Thought I might stay in town a few days." "Make sure you get settled proper, if that's agreeable to you." Eleanor smiled. "Very agreeable, Mr. Garland." That evening, as they made what would likely be their penultimate camp, a spring storm rolled in unexpectedly. The first fat raindrops sent them scrambling to secure their belongings. Eleanor retreated to her wagon, but Yates had only his bedroll and saddle. "You'll be soaked," Eleanor called out, watching him struggle to rig a makeshift shelter with a tarp. "There's room in the wagon." Yates hesitated, clearly weighing propriety against practicality as the rain intensified. "I promise not to compromise your virtue," Eleanor added with a teasing smile that broke his serious expression. "It's my virtue I'm worried about, Miss Harper," he returned, but gathered his things and climbed into the wagon. The space was cramped with both of them inside. Eleanor sat on her narrow traveling bed, while Yates perched awkwardly on a trunk, water dripping from his hat brim. "You should remove that coat before you catch your death," Eleanor advised, turning slightly to offer privacy. She heard rustling as he complied, then the thud of boots being removed. When she turned back, Yates was in his shirt sleeves, his hair damp and tousled where it had been beneath his hat. The wagon seemed suddenly smaller, the air between them charged with awareness. Rain drummed on the canvas cover, creating a cocoon of sound that separated them from the world outside. "I should thank you," Eleanor said softly, "not just for fixing my wheel, but for everything since. I've learned more traveling with you than I could have from any book." Yates's expression was unreadable in the dim light. "I should be thanking you, Miss Harper. It's been a long time since I've enjoyed someone's company so much." "Eleanor," she corrected. "After all we've been through, surely we can dispense with formalities." "Eleanor," he repeated, her name sounding different in his deep voice. "Then you must call me Yates." A crack of thunder made Eleanor jump, inadvertently moving closer to him. Yates remained perfectly still, but she could see the pulse beating rapidly at his throat. "I find myself reluctant to reach San Bernardino," he admitted quietly. "These have been good days." Eleanor nodded, her eyes not leaving his. "The best days." Another lightning flash illuminated the wagon interior, briefly revealing the intensity in Yates's gaze. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "Eleanor, I should tell you, I haven't been entirely honest," she tensed. "What do you mean?" Yates ran a hand through his damp hair. "I told you I was returning from selling cattle in Tucson, which is true. But I didn't tell you why I was on that particular trail at that particular time." Eleanor waited, her heart beating faster. "I saw you in Tucson," he continued. "At the general store. You were asking directions and the clerk was being less than helpful. You handled him with such dignity. I was impressed. You followed me." Eleanor wasn't sure whether to be flattered or alarmed. Not exactly. Yates looked uncomfortable. "I was heading back to California anyway, but I did choose the same trail hoping to make your acquaintance. I never expected your wheel to break." "So you didn't just happen along," Eleanor clarified. Yates shook his head. "I'd been keeping a respectful distance behind you for 2 days. When I saw your wagon stopped, I thought it was my chance to introduce myself properly." He grimaced. "I realize how this sounds. I swear I had no dishonorable intentions." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. "So you're telling me that our meeting wasn't the coincidence I thought it was?" "No," Yates admitted, "though the broken wheel certainly was. And everything since has been exactly as it seemed." Eleanor studied his face, finding only sincerity there. "I suppose I should be outraged. You'd be within your rights. And yet," she continued, "I find I'm rather moved by the gesture." Yates looked up in surprise. "You are?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "It's not every day a woman discovers she made such an impression that a man would travel days just for a chance at conversation." The tension in Yates's shoulders eased slightly. "You made quite an impression, Eleanor Harper. More than you know." The storm continued around them, but the atmosphere inside the wagon had shifted. The rain created a private world where normal constraints seemed suspended, allowing truths to emerge that might otherwise remain hidden. "I've never met anyone like you," Yates said, his voice barely audible above the storm. "I don't want tomorrow to come if it means watching you ride into San Bernardino and out of my life." Eleanor's breath caught. "Is that what you think will happen?" "I don't know what to think." His honesty was disarming. "A lady like you, educated and refined, taking up with a rough rancher. It doesn't seem likely." "You underestimate yourself," Eleanor said softly, "and perhaps overestimate me. I'm just a Virginia schoolteacher seeking a new beginning." "You're far more than that," Yates countered. "You're brave and intelligent and beautiful. Any man would be proud to." He stopped abruptly. "Proud to what?" Eleanor prompted, her heart racing. Yates met her gaze directly. "Proud to court you properly if you were willing." The declaration hung between them, simple and profound. Eleanor felt lightheaded, as if the oxygen had suddenly thinned. "I would be willing," she whispered. "Very willing." Something in Yates's expression broke open, revealing a vulnerability that touched Eleanor deeply. He moved slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, until he was seated beside her on the narrow bed. His hand, work roughened but gentle, came up to cup her cheek. "May I?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak around the emotion constricting her throat. The first press of his lips against hers was tentative, questioning. The second was not. His mouth moved over hers with increasing confidence as Eleanor responded, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, strong and rapid, matching her own. When they finally parted, both breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment you glared at me for suggesting your wheel needed a miracle." Eleanor laughed softly. "I was rather prickly, wasn't I?" "You were magnificent," he corrected. Outside, the storm gradually subsided, the pounding rain giving way to a gentle patter. Inside the wagon, Eleanor and Yates talked through the night, speaking of possibilities and dreams, discovering the remarkable alignment of their hopes despite their different backgrounds. Morning brought clear skies and new understanding between them. They broke camp with the ease of a team long accustomed to working together, exchanging glances filled with private meaning. As they approached the mountain pass that would lead them to San Bernardino, Eleanor felt not the triumph she had expected upon reaching her destination, but a bittersweet awareness that one journey was ending while another was just beginning. The town of San Bernardino came into view on the afternoon of the following day, a bustling collection of buildings nestled in a valley, with mountains rising majestically behind it. After the solitude of their journey, the sight of so many people going about their business was almost jarring. "It's bigger than I expected," Eleanor remarked as they approached the outskirts. "Growing fast," Yates agreed. The railroad's coming through soon. This place will be transformed in a few years." They drew curious glances as they made their way down the main street, a dust-covered woman driving a wagon with a mismatched wheel, accompanied by an equally trail-worn cowboy. Eleanor was acutely conscious of her appearance after weeks on the trail. The school building was easy to identify, a whitewashed structure with a bell tower, set apart from the commercial buildings. Adjacent to it stood a modest house that Eleanor assumed was the teacher's residence. "This is it," she said, reining Pepper to a halt. "My new home." Before she could dismount, the school door opened, and an elderly gentleman emerged, squinting in their direction. "Miss Harper," he called, approaching with an outstretched hand. "Bartholomew Jenkins, school board president. We'd almost given up hope of your arrival." Eleanor accepted his handshake. "I apologize for the delay, Mr. Jenkins. We encountered some difficulties on the trail." Jenkins glanced at Yates with undisguised curiosity. "Yates Garland," Yates introduced himself, tipping his hat. "Miss Harper had trouble with her wagon. I was fortunate enough to be able to assist." Jenkins's eyebrows rose slightly. "Garland, the rancher from north of town." "The same," Yates confirmed. "Well, well." Jenkins looked between them with new interest. "That's fortunate indeed. Miss Harper, let me show you to your quarters. You must be exhausted from your journey." As Eleanor gathered her belongings, Yates dismounted to help. Their hands brushed as he handed her a bag, the brief contact sending warmth through her despite the public setting. "Will I see you soon?" she asked quietly. "Count on it," Yates promised. "I need to see to some business at my ranch, but I'll call on you properly in a few days, if that's acceptable." "More than acceptable," Eleanor assured him. They parted with formal words that belied the depth of feeling between them. As Eleanor followed Jenkins toward her new home, she glanced back to see Yates watching her, his expression a mixture of longing and promise that sustained her through the flurry of introductions and explanations that followed. The teacher's house was simple but comfortable, 2 rooms downstairs and a sleeping loft above, furnished with basics and scrupulously clean. Jenkins explained that school would begin in 2 weeks, giving Eleanor time to settle in and prepare. "The children are eager to meet their new teacher," he told her. "We've been without formal education for nearly a year since Mrs. Abernathy returned east." Eleanor nodded, trying to focus on his words while her mind continuously drifted to Yates and when she might see him again. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Eleanor cleaned her new home, unpacked her belongings, and familiarized herself with the town. San Bernardino was a vibrant community with a diverse population: merchants and farmers, Mexicans and Americans, the occasional Chinese laborer, and even a small group of Mormons who had remained after the main body had returned to Utah. Eleanor was welcomed warmly by most, though she detected occasional whispers about her arrival in the company of Yates Garland. It seemed he had a reputation in the area, respected as a successful rancher and fair businessman, but considered something of a loner. "Keeps to himself mostly," the general store owner's wife told Eleanor as she purchased supplies. "Been here 5 years or so. Built that ranch up from nothing, works harder than any 3 men. Folks respect that. He seems well regarded," Eleanor observed casually. The woman nodded. "Oh, he is. Honest as the day is long. Helped organize the cattle drive last year when the drought had everyone struggling. Just never seemed interested in settling down, if you take my meaning. Turned down Widow Sullivan's daughter without a second glance, and she's the prettiest thing this side of Sacramento." Eleanor absorbed this information with more interest than she cared to admit. The thought of Yates rejecting another woman's advances shouldn't have pleased her as much as it did. True to his word, Yates called on her 3 days after their arrival in San Bernardino. Eleanor was arranging books in the schoolroom when a shadow fell across the doorway. She turned to find him standing there, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically nervous. He had cleaned up considerably, his clothes were fresh, his hair neatly trimmed, and he appeared to have visited a barber, his usual stubble replaced by smooth, shaven cheeks. "Miss Harper," he greeted her formally, aware of the open door and potential observers. "I trust you're settling in well." Eleanor smoothed her skirts, suddenly conscious of her own appearance. "Mr. Garland." "Yes, thank you. Everyone has been most welcoming." An awkward silence fell between them, so at odds with the easy conversation they had shared on the trail. "I was wondering," Yates continued, his fingers working the brim of his hat, "if you might do me the honor of accompanying me to supper at the hotel restaurant this evening." Eleanor couldn't suppress her smile. "I would be delighted, Mr. Garland." Relief washed over his features. "Excellent. Shall I call for you at 6? 6 would be perfect." After he left, Eleanor found herself unable to concentrate on her preparations. She spent far too long deciding what to wear, eventually selecting her best dress, a deep blue wool that complemented her eyes, with minimal travel wrinkles. The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in San Bernardino, which wasn't saying much by Eastern standards but represented luxury on the frontier. Heads turned when they entered together, curious gazes following them to their table. "I believe we're causing a stir," Eleanor murmured as Yates held her chair. "Let them stir," he replied with a wink. "They've nothing better to talk about in this town." The meal was pleasant, the food surprisingly good. Yates spoke of his ranch, describing recent improvements and his plans for expansion. Eleanor shared her ideas for the school curriculum, her enthusiasm evident as she outlined her vision for education on the frontier. As they lingered over coffee, Yates reached across the table to take her hand. "I've missed you these past days," he admitted. "Feels strange not to see you every morning by the campfire." "I've missed you too," Eleanor confessed. "My house feels very quiet after weeks of travel." Something shifted in Yates's expression. "Eleanor, I'm not one for beating around the bush, so I'll speak plainly. These past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. I know we haven't known each other long by conventional standards, but out here, people measure relationships differently." Eleanor's heart began to race. "How do they measure them?" "By the quality of character revealed when facing hardship together," Yates said seriously. "By the depth of understanding that grows when sharing both danger and beauty. By the certainty that feels like coming home, even in the middle of nowhere." "That's beautifully said," Eleanor whispered, her throat tight with emotion. "I'm not asking for anything now," Yates continued. "You've just arrived, you're establishing yourself here, but I want you to know my intentions. I intend to court you properly, Eleanor Harper. And if you'll have me, someday I intend to make you my wife." The directness of his declaration took Eleanor's breath away. In Virginia, such a conversation would have been preceded by months of formal visits, chaperoned outings, and oblique discussions of future prospects. But they weren't in Virginia, and Eleanor found she preferred Western forthrightness to Eastern circumlocution. "I would welcome your courtship," she said simply. "As for the rest, I believe we have time to discover if we suit." Yates's smile was radiant. "That's all I ask, for time to show you that what began on the trail wasn't just the circumstance, but something real and lasting." In the weeks that followed, Yates proved himself a dedicated suitor. He called on Eleanor regularly, always respectful of her position in the community. They attended church together on Sundays, rode into the countryside on her free afternoons, and gradually became a recognized couple in San Bernardino society. The school term began, and Eleanor found herself immersed in the challenges and rewards of teaching frontier children. Her students ranged from 6 to 16, with widely varying levels of previous education. Some could barely write their names, while others had a solid foundation in reading and arithmetic. What they all shared was a hunger for knowledge and a respect for learning that Eleanor found deeply gratifying. These children understood the value of education in a way her Virginia pupils never had. They saw directly how reading, writing, and mathematics could improve their lives and prospects. Yates took an interest in her work, sometimes visiting the school to help with repairs or to demonstrate practical applications of the lessons she taught. The children adored him, especially the boys, who hung on his every word about ranching and horsemanship. "You're good with them," Eleanor observed one afternoon as they watched the children playing in the schoolyard. "Ever thought of having your own?" The question slipped out before she could consider its implications. Yates gave her a sidelong glance, his expression softening. "I've thought about it," he said quietly. "More than ever lately." The autumn progressed, bringing cooler temperatures and changing leaves to the mountains surrounding San Bernardino. Eleanor settled into her role as teacher and became increasingly integrated into the community. She joined the Ladies' Aid Society, helped organize a harvest festival, and even began tutoring adults who wanted to improve their literacy. Through it all, her relationship with Yates deepened. They discovered shared values beneath their different backgrounds: a belief in hard work, a love of learning, a desire to build something meaningful in this new land. There were differences too, of course. Eleanor's Eastern refinement occasionally clashed with Yates's frontier directness. His practical approach sometimes frustrated her more idealistic tendencies. But they learned to navigate these differences with humor and compromise, each coming to value the other's perspective. One crisp November evening, Yates invited Eleanor to visit his ranch for the first time. It was a significant step. They had always met in town or in public settings before. Mr. Jenkins agreed to drive her out in his buggy, serving as a nominal chaperone before returning to town. The ranch was situated in a beautiful valley about 5 miles north of San Bernardino. As they approached, Eleanor could see why Yates spoke of it with such pride. The land was verdant even in late autumn, with a clear stream running through it and mountains providing a dramatic backdrop. The cabin was indeed rough but solid, as he had described: a 2-room structure with a stone chimney, surrounded by well-built corrals and outbuildings. A small garden plot was visible behind the house, and flowers grew along the front path despite the season. "You planted flowers?" Eleanor asked in surprise as Yates helped her from the buggy. He looked almost embarrassed. "Last spring. Thought the place needed some color." The interior of the cabin revealed much about the man. It was scrupulously clean and organized, with simple but sturdy furniture, most of it clearly handmade. Books lined one wall far more than Eleanor had expected, and a desk held papers that suggested Yates kept meticulous records of his ranching business. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. "I can feel how much care you've put into it." Yates showed her around the property with evident pride, introducing her to his ranch hands, 3 Mexican brothers who lived in a smaller cabin nearby, and showing her the cattle, the horses, and the improvements he planned to make. "Next spring I'll start building a proper house," he told her as they stood on a rise overlooking the valley. "Something with more rooms, glass windows, maybe even indoor plumbing if I can figure it out. This cabin was fine for a bachelor, but it's not suitable for," he broke off, glancing at her. "For what?" Eleanor prompted, though she knew the answer. "For a family," Yates finished quietly, "if that's in my future." Their eyes met, and Eleanor felt the weight of unspoken possibilities between them. 3 months had passed since their first meeting on that dusty trail, not long by conventional standards, but a lifetime in the experiences they had shared. Before Eleanor could respond, they were interrupted by one of the ranch hands calling Yates to help with a distressed calf. The moment passed, but the question lingered between them for the remainder of her visit. As winter settled over San Bernardino, bringing rain to the valley and snow to the surrounding mountains, Eleanor and Yates continued their courtship. They celebrated Christmas together, exchanging simple gifts: a hand-tooled leather journal from Yates, a knitted scarf from Eleanor, and sharing holiday meals with various members of the community who had adopted Eleanor as one of their own. In January, a severe storm system brought flooding to parts of the town. Yates arrived at Eleanor's door before dawn one morning, concern etched on his face. "River's rising fast," he told her. "The school and your house should be safe on high ground, but some of the lower areas are already underwater. I'm helping organize evacuation for the families near the creek." Eleanor immediately reached for her coat. "I'll come with you. The school can serve as a shelter." Together, they spent the day rescuing families from the flood zone, setting up temporary accommodations in the school building, and distributing food and dry clothing. They worked seamlessly as a team, anticipating each other's needs and complementing each other's strengths. By nightfall, the immediate crisis had passed, though the river remained dangerously high. Eleanor moved among the displaced families in the schoolroom, offering comfort and organizing sleeping arrangements. When she finally had a moment to rest, she found Yates watching her from across the room, an expression of profound tenderness on his face. "What is it?" she asked when she reached his side. "Just thinking," he replied, "about how lucky this town is to have you, how lucky I am." Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion at the door drew their attention. One of Yates's ranch hands had arrived with urgent news: the flood had breached the lower pasture fences, and cattle were straying into dangerous terrain. "I have to go," Yates said regretfully. "Stay here where it's safe." Eleanor nodded, understanding the responsibilities of a rancher. "Be careful." He squeezed her hand and was gone, riding into the stormy night toward his threatened livelihood. 2 days passed with no word from Yates. The flood waters began to recede, families returned to assess damage to their homes, and Eleanor tried to focus on helping where she could while fighting growing concern for Yates's safety. On the third morning, as she was sweeping mud from the schoolhouse steps, a rider appeared through the mist. Even at a distance, Eleanor recognized Yates's silhouette. She dropped her broom and ran to meet him as he dismounted stiffly, clearly exhausted. "Thank God," she breathed, taking in his mud-splattered appearance and the dark circles under his eyes. "I've been so worried." "Lost 8 head," he reported grimly. "Could have been worse. Managed to drive most of the herd to higher ground." He swayed slightly on his feet. "Haven't slept since I left." Eleanor took his arm firmly. "Come inside. You need rest and food." He didn't argue, allowing her to lead him to her small house behind the school. Eleanor sat him at her kitchen table, removed his muddy boots, and set about preparing a simple meal while heating water for him to wash. "You should have sent word," she scolded gently, placing a steaming bowl of stew before him. "I imagined all sorts of terrible fates." Yates managed a tired smile. "Worried about me, school teacher?" "Of course I was worried," Eleanor replied, her voice betraying more emotion than she intended. "I care about you, Yates, deeply." Something in her tone made him look up sharply, the fatigue in his eyes momentarily replaced by intensity. "How deeply?" Eleanor took a steadying breath. "Deeply enough that I don't want to imagine my life without you in it." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Yates reached across the table, taking her hand in his mud-streaked one. "Eleanor Harper," he said solemnly, "I've known since the third day on that trail that you were the woman I wanted to spend my life with. Every day since has only confirmed it. I love you, your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you face challenges and the way you've made this community your own. I love watching you with your students and seeing the difference you make in their lives." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since you fixed my wagon wheel and refused payment." Yates stood, never releasing her hand, and drew her to her feet. "Then marry me," he said simply. "Be my wife, my partner. Help me build something lasting in this wild country." "Yes," Eleanor answered without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." His kiss was tender despite his exhaustion, a promise of devotion that needed no further words. They were married in the spring, when wildflowers carpeted the valley, and new leaves dressed the cottonwoods along the creek. The entire town turned out for the celebration. Eleanor's students, the school board, the Ladies' Aid Society, ranchers who did business with Yates, and even a small delegation of Apache from the hills, with whom Yates had maintained peaceful trading relations. The ceremony took place in the churchyard, with flowers adorning every available surface. Eleanor wore a new dress of ivory silk, ordered from San Francisco at considerable expense, while Yates cut a handsome figure in a black suit that made him almost unrecognizable to those accustomed to his usual ranch attire. "Never thought I'd see the day Garland dressed like a banker," one of the local ranchers commented with good-natured ribbing. "For her, I'd wear anything," Yates replied simply, his eyes never leaving his bride. Their vows were straightforward and heartfelt, spoken in clear voices that carried across the hushed gathering. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that erupted seemed to shake the mountains themselves. The celebration continued well into the evening, with feasting, dancing, and enough goodwill to sustain the couple through any hardship the frontier might present. As night fell and the last guests departed, Yates lifted Eleanor into his wagon, a new one, purchased specifically for his bride, with a fresh coat of paint and wheels that matched perfectly. "Ready, Mrs. Garland?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. Eleanor leaned into his side, feeling the solid strength of him. "Ready, Mr. Garland." They drove toward their ranch, their home, beneath a canopy of stars that seemed to illuminate the path ahead. The new house stood waiting for them, completed just days before the wedding, a proper two-story structure with glass windows, a wide porch, and room for the family they both hoped to create. As Yates carried her across the threshold, Eleanor thought back to that dusty trail where their story had begun, a broken wheel, an unexpected rescue, and the journey that had changed everything. "What are you smiling about?" Yates asked, setting her gently on her feet in their new home. "I was just thinking," Eleanor replied, "that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. If my wagon wheel hadn't broken that day, I would have found another excuse to meet you," Yates finished confidently. "Some things are meant to be, broken wheels or not." Eleanor laughed, joy bubbling up from deep within her. "I believe you would have. Count on it," Yates whispered, drawing her close. "Some journeys are destined from the start." Life on the ranch presented challenges and joys in equal measure. Eleanor continued teaching in town 3 days a week, riding back and forth on a gentle mare Yates had trained specifically for her. The other days, she threw herself into learning ranching, keeping accounts, managing household supplies, and even helping with calving when extra hands were needed. The community watched their partnership with interest, some skeptical that an educated Eastern woman would adapt to frontier life, others certain that Eleanor Harper Garland would thrive wherever she planted herself. The latter group proved correct. By their first anniversary, the ranch had expanded again, with new pastures fenced and a small orchard planted behind the house. Eleanor's garden produced vegetables in abundance, and she had begun experimenting with preserving techniques to see them through the winters. "You're a natural frontierswoman," Yates told her one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Who would have thought a Virginia schoolteacher would take to ranching so well?" Eleanor smiled, her hand resting protectively over her slightly rounded abdomen. "Perhaps I was always meant for this life, just waiting for the right guide to show me the way." Yates's eyes widened as he registered the significance of her gesture. "Eleanor, are you?" She nodded, joy illuminating her features. "Due in winter, according to my calculations, Doctor. Porter confirmed it yesterday when I was in town." Yates dropped to his knees before her chair, placing his hand reverently over hers. "A child," he whispered, wonder in his voice. "Our child." "The first of several, I hope," Eleanor said softly. "As many as you want," Yates promised, pressing his lips to her hand. "We'll fill this house with children and laughter and books." Their son, James, was born on a clear December night, with snow on the mountains and a full moon illuminating the valley. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, evident from his first lusty cries. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, Catherine, with dark curls and a smile that could melt the sternest heart. The children thrived in the freedom of ranch life, growing strong and curious under the loving guidance of their parents. Eleanor continued teaching, bringing her children with her to school when they were old enough. Eventually, as San Bernardino grew, she helped establish a proper academy and trained other teachers to assist with the expanding student population. Yates's ranch became one of the most successful in the region, known for quality stock and fair dealing. He served on the town council, helped organize the region's first formal cattle cooperative, and earned a reputation as a man whose word was his bond. Together, they weathered the inevitable hardships of frontier life: drought years that threatened the herd, illness that confined Eleanor to bed for weeks one terrible winter, conflicts with land speculators as the area became more settled. Through it all, their partnership remained unshakable, each challenge met with combined strength and unwavering support. 10 years after their wedding, as they celebrated with a family picnic by the creek where they had once camped as strangers, Yates pulled a small package from his pocket. "What's this?" Eleanor asked, accepting the carefully wrapped parcel. "Open it and see," Yates encouraged, their 3 children, James, Catherine, and 4-year-old Thomas, crowding close in curiosity. Inside was a piece of wood, shaped into a small circle and polished to a high shine. Eleanor turned it in her hands, puzzled, until recognition dawned. "It's from my wagon wheel," she breathed. "The one that broke." Yates nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners the way they always did when he smiled. "A piece of the original. I kept it all these years." "Had it made into a keepsake?" "Why now?" Eleanor asked, touched by the gesture. 10 years seemed worth marking," Yates replied, "and I wanted our children to have a piece of how their story began." Eleanor leaned across the picnic blanket to kiss him, ignoring the exaggerated disgust of their older children. "Best broken wheel in history," she murmured against his lips. "Best repair job, too," Yates returned with a wink, "though I can't take credit for where it led us." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the Garland family gathered their picnic things and headed home to the house that had grown with their family, on land that had flourished under their care, in a community they had helped shape. Eleanor took her husband's hand as they walked, their children running ahead down the familiar path. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been on that trail that day?" she asked. Yates squeezed her fingers. "No," he said with quiet certainty. Because I would have found you somehow. Some wheels are meant to break, Eleanor, so that lives can be mended together. She laughed, the sound carrying across the valley that had become their kingdom. That's quite poetic for a rancher. I had a good teacher, Yates replied, drawing her close as they walked toward home, their journey continuing exactly as it was meant to be.